So here's the amazing thing. We've been talking about this man named Paul all week long. Paul wrote this. Paul said that. Paul did this. But who's Paul? Who is this guy named Paul? It's an amazing, amazing story. We don't have time to go through his whole life history. But what's amazing about a testimony is that a personal testimony, you can get to the core heart of the matter about who you are and how God changed your life. And when you pay attention to that, it really is meaningful. So, Mr. Ethan, could you start in chapter 22 of Acts? And we're going to start with verse 3. And Paul is going to tell us who he is. Please.
I am a Jewish man born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel and educated according to the fifth view of our canonical law, being zealous for God just as all of you are today.
Could you read, I'm sorry, sir, 4 and 5, please?
Yes. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women in jail, as both the high priest and the whole council of the elders can testify about me. After I received letters from them to the brothers, I traveled to Damascus to bring those who were prisoners there to be punished in Jerusalem.
So what's he saying? What was Paul's job at this point in his life? How old was he? He was probably about 30. About 30, that's when typically a Jewish man became involved in his community. What was his training? According to the strict manner of the law of our fathers. He was a lawyer. He was a Jewish lawyer. He knew not the law about how fast you can go out on the highways and how to write up a will and those kind of laws. He knew the law of God. He knew the 10 Commandments. He knew all the law. You know how many laws there are in the Old Testament? 600. Glenn and I went through that one time. 612, 607. That's how many laws there are. And do you know what's so insane about it is that these guys named the Pharisees, who Paul had become a member of, they were so diligent about the law that they even had to trim their fingernails in the right order. And if you didn't do it right, you had to start over. You had to do this finger, then maybe this finger, and your toes the same way. That's how meticulous they were about everything they did in their life. Legalism squared times 1,000. Everything was legalized to that point. And trying to keep it, what did he say about himself? He drove himself insane. So he is doing what? He says, these people who are preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, they are not obeying the law the way we know the law. And what did he do about that? He put them in jail. He imprisoned them. They even wanted to kill him. So what is Paul's role in spreading the gospel right here? Nothing. In fact, it's anti-spreading the gospel. He's determined he's going to stop this thing called the way in its tracks. We got to nip this in the bud, as they would say. We got to stop this. And he was diligent. There's the word there, zealous, meaning he really, really wanted to do that. It was passionate for him to stop this heresy, this false teaching called the way. But then, Bacchus, could you read, please, sir, 6 through 11? Here's what happens. His name at that time was his Jewish name, Saul. What happened to Saul? You can literally say he got knocked off his high horse. Up here, I'm the law. I'm representing the law. These people are bad. I'm going to put them all in prison. I'm going to stop this heresy, this false teaching. What happened? Who knocked him off his horse? Jesus appeared to him. The risen, Jesus has already been crucified, dead, buried, risen. He appeared to Paul. And what did he basically tell him in verse 11 and verse 10? Paul asked him, what shall I do? Okay, you knocked me off my horse. There's this tremendous light. I don't understand anything that's going on here. What do you want me to do? And the Lord said to me, rise, go into Damascus, and there I'm going to tell you all that I have for you to do. Talk about experience. What did he have for him to do? In the small group this morning, we looked in the back of our Bibles, if you have a study Bible, and you have these maps. And it talks about Paul's first missionary journey, Paul's second missionary journey, Paul's third missionary journey. And you see that he's covering most of the world right at that particular time. Paul, this guy, he did what? What was he responding to? Well, let's go back to Acts. Marcus, could you read that, please? Acts 1:8. Sometimes you hear people talk about an Acts 1:8 church. What's the focus of an Acts 1:8 church? Let's find out. Our church just experienced something there for the last 2 years. Actually, it happened again this year. It's called the Secret Church. And here we live in a kind of an isolated, somewhat isolated, sheltered sort of an area. We don't even understand that what Bacchus just read, to the ends of the earth, is going on right this second. And not in places that are saying, hey, come on in, spread the gospel. Well, we want to hear all about it. No. Not North Korea and Indonesia and places in Africa. Do they want to hear it? No, they don't want to hear it. That's why it's called secret church. They can't do something like we're doing here today and come together freely in a free country. We're so blessed. We don't even understand. They're persecuted more than we could ever imagine. They don't want them to have church. They don't want them to hear the gospel. And so it's underground, if you will. It's dangerous business. People are being killed for this gospel, this spreading of the gospel to the ends of the earth. It's dangerous work. It's not like this. It's not comfortable. It's tough. So we've got this introduction to who Paul is. And we've got to have this introduction to what Jesus tells him he's going to do. He's going to do what? He's going to take the gospel to the Gentiles. Who are Gentiles? If you look in a mirror, you're seeing a Gentile, more than likely. It's anybody who's not Jewish. So the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ first came to the Jewish people. Was Jesus Jewish? Yes, Jesus was Jewish. He spoke to his own people. And then God said, okay, I promised to Abraham way back, 2,000 years before this, I promised to Abraham that one of his offspring would be a blessing to the whole world. A blessing to the whole world. And that this message would go to everyone in the entire world. And so here it is happening. So let's go back to Romans. Let's go to Romans 15 and see how Paul responded. So what did Paul do? He knew the gospel. He embraced the gospel. He lived out the gospel. And what was his mission? What was his mission? I have accomplished what it is that through me to bring the Gentiles to obedience. Okay? Were there any Gentiles living in Rome? The whole city was Gentiles. It was We can't even imagine the depravity and corruption that was going on in this city of Rome at the time that Paul was writing this letter. We can't even begin to imagine it. But he's writing to them and he's telling them what he has done. What is his mission? What is our mission? Very good. Thank you all for reading that. I'm making my ambition to do what? Preach the gospel. Share. To anyone who would listen all over the world. That map confirms that he went a lot of places. And here's what's so amazing. Do you know that the book that you just read, this letter to the Romans, you know how long ago this was written? 2,000 years ago. Paul wrote this letter to the Romans 2,000 years ago. And we're sitting here because of what Jesus did, knocking him off his horse and sending him on the mission and having him plant churches all over the world and having him sit down and write 13 letters in the New Testament. We are now the recipients of this book, that many years later. So here's what we want you to understand and help you with. What I realized was that in the book of Romans is what's called the Romans Road to Salvation. And we're going to experience, people are experiencing salvation here this week. We're going to have baptisms here in a moment. They're going to be symbols of that salvation, that understanding of what salvation is. That's very important. So here's what I want to leave you with today. When you are faced with a situation, how am I going to talk to someone about Christ, about this gospel? How am I going to do it? We need to give you something practical to work with. Okay? And that's what the Romans Road is. It's very practical ability to understand the gospel and to share the gospel with someone else. Excuse me. So let's start with Romans chapter 3, verse 10. Why do they call it the Romans Road? You know, I saw an interesting study note on that. It said, do you know how God used the Roman Empire? The Roman Empire was the most corrupt and evil system of governance that you could ever come up with. Who actually nailed Jesus to the cross? The Romans. They're the ones who executed him. They had a way to execute people who didn't obey that not only drove them through tremendous pain, but humiliated them by hanging them on that cross. It was the most humiliating and torturous way. Of course, they beat him almost to within an inch of his life before they hung him on the cross. That's the Romans. Do you know what they did with early Christians who lived in Rome? These people that Paul's writing to? You know, one of the fun things that the emperor did with them? He tied them to a post and he lit them on fire. Tied them to a post. Would you like somebody to come in here and say, do you believe in Jesus? Yeah, I believe in Jesus. Well, let's go outside. I got something we want to do outside. We got a bunch of posts out there. You know what they're for? We're going to tie you to those posts. See how much you believe in Jesus. They were called the emperor's candles, where they lit them at night, so that when these people would die this painful death of fire, the emperor would look at it and go, wow, that's really nice. That's how corrupt and depraved and sinful those people were. So we're walking through the Romans road, but God was able to use that because the Romans were extremely gifted engineers. And one of the things that the Romans built were roads. Roads all over this area where Paul had traveled. What's the benefit when the Roman Empire finally begins to accept Christ? What's the benefit of having good roads? message. Well, quick. So God took what was evil, just like it talks about in many places, just like with Joseph. He took what was evil, what was corrupt, would be used for corruption, and he allowed the gospel to spread more quickly because of these roads. So let's walk the Romans road. Would someone like to read Romans 3? Yes, ma'am. Would you read Romans 3, verses 10, 11, and 12? Well, that's a great place to start. That's really welcome news. Do you realize what he's saying? Do you realize that the point of that is that none of us has any chance of having an eternal relationship with God? None of us. We don't have any chance of doing that. None of us is righteous, means we're all unholy. We're all sinners, as we've been talking about all weekend. No one understands. No one seeks after God. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Do you do that? Do we all do that? Do we love God that much? All your heart? So that makes us realize that if we're honest with ourselves, no, we don't do that. And so we're ending up where Paul was. Oh, wretched person that I am, who will save me from this? Walk the Romans road a little further.